morning. I am Dr. Sean Coomer, Chief Medical Officer of the Kansas City Division of the University of Kansas Health System. Welcome back to Open Mics with Dr. Stites/Coomer and our monthly edition of Show Me the Science. Do you remember 10 years ago in the summer of 2014 when it seemed like everyone was dumping buckets of ice water on each other? Everyone from LeBron James to Kermit the Frog to providers, staff, and executives here at the University of Kansas Health System, including me, were taking part in the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS. It was a surprisingly effective fundraising and awareness effort for a disease where there's no cure, but there is hope. But where do we stand 10 years since the Ice Bucket Challenge? Today, we are meeting with someone living with ALS and hearing how she finds strength in the face of a terminal diagnosis. We're asking two expert physicians what excites them about the future of ALS treatment and what it means to see patients at an ALS Association Certified Treatment Center of Excellence, like we have here at the University of Kansas Health System. I'm joined today by Dr. Omar Jadid.
Morning.
And Dr. Jeffrey Statler.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
They are both neurologists. Dr. Jadid is specialized in neuromuscular medicine. They're involved in ALS patient care and research that one day could translate into the clinic. Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for being here. Joining us remotely is Kelly Marvin. She lives with ALS and was diagnosed about 1.5 years ago. But instead of giving up, she has been giving back. Kelly, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. We're looking forward to hearing your story. Dr. Jadid, help us establish how ALS works. It's all about the brain's connection to muscles?
Yeah, so ALS is a motor neuron disease. There are upper motor neurons in the cortex of the brain that send signals to the lower motor neurons in the spinal cord. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, those degenerate. This disease was described in the late 1800s. And so far, we haven't had an exact mechanism of pathogenesis, why it happens. There are, of course, theories, and we have discovered so many genes now, but it's a progressive disease that causes muscle weakness in the limbs, affects mobility, hand function, affects speech, swallowing, and respiration. Which usually is the detrimental thing.
Gotcha. So this, obviously, you said it was discovered in the 1800s. It gained notoriety as being called Lou Gehrig's disease in the 1950s after the famous Hall of Fame baseball player. But you mentioned before there's this term about motor neuron disease. So can you connect the dots between ALS and motor neuron disease and maybe elaborate a little bit further on that?
So the big umbrella of the disease process is called motor neuron disease that involves the upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. And there is a spectrum of motor neuron disease. If it's purely affecting the upper motor neurons, we call it PLS. And if it's purely affecting the lower motor neurons, we call it PMA. And in the middle of the spectrum, all that section where both are involved, the upper motor neuron and lower motor neurons, to variable degrees, it would be called ALS. Okay. And there are hereditary forms, and there are sporadic forms and regional variants and others.
Great. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. Yeah. So thanks for talking about that. So ALS is a progressive disease. The symptoms get worse over time. So Dr. Statler, how quickly can it progress, and is there a typical progression?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the real challenges as we think about developing therapies and, really understanding ALS is there's just so much variability from one person to the next in terms of the rate of progression and what happens. When people first read about their condition, one of the first things they see is it's a terminal disease. So they'll ask us, how long do I have? And one way of thinking or showing that variability is thinking about the survival time. 50% of people we see will survive somewhere between 2 and 5 years. But you can hear from that really broad range that that's not super precise, and 50% of people are going to be outside that range. So we may see someone who comes to us with initial symptoms and it just progresses very rapidly week for week and they survive less than a year. but we'll have other people who we'll see in clinic for more than a decade. Unfortunately, we don't have a great guide to like what's going to happen to a specific individual as we look towards the future when they come in and see us, other than certain of the inherited forms that may progress more rapidly. And now we have a biomarker called neurofilament that has some prognostic value. The best indicator we have for how someone will do over time is just clinically how they do over about 6 months to a year.
Okay, so you hinted at this. How do you figure out progression? It's really hard to do. You can measure somehow, though, with how a patient is doing on a scale based on a questionnaire. How do you use that questionnaire, the ALS FRS?
Yeah, the ALS functional rating scale, it was originally designed for clinical trials. It's 12 questions. The questions are really pertinent, though. They reflect everyday activities in our lives, things like walking, handwriting, eating, dressing, breathing. The scale for each item ranges from 4, which would be no difficulty, to needing a little assistance, needing a little more assistance, or being unable to do it. So the total scale will range from 48, which would be normal, to 0, which would be completely paralyzed. Because we've used this scale very consistently in the clinical trials, there's large pooled placebo data from thousands of patients, and we have a pretty good idea of what their rate of progression is from month to month, and it's a loss of about 1 point a month, so it's sort of easy to remember. In clinic, we see a little bit slower. We use the same tool in clinic because it can give us a good idea of what areas of the body are affected and what we need to achieve that day in clinic to help someone. But the rate is about 0.75 points per month in our clinic.
Okay. So what is the typical age of diagnosis?
Well, we often say it's a disease of middle age because the average is going to be somewhere around 55 to early 60s, but it's a disease that can actually affect people throughout the lifespan. In our clinic, the youngest individual we've had was 12 years old, and we've had people as old as 90 that we see.
Okay, well, thanks for telling them about that. Let's turn to Kelly. Kelly was in her early 30s when she was diagnosed. Kelly, what led to your diagnosis, and what were your symptoms, and what were you feeling?
Yeah, so my right foot was very weak, which was unusual for me. I'm a very active person, so I knew something was wrong when I go to the gym at least 5 to 6 days a week. So it prompted me to say, okay, there's something going on that's not right now.
Okay, so obviously this is devastating. You heard Dr. Statlin saying when people first read about the diagnosis, they see terminal diagnosis, and that's hard to get past that sentence. Mentally and emotionally, how did you process that news?
I think I cried for about 2 days straight at first, but then I got better. You find a good doctor and support team, and that makes a huge difference for how you feel.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your progression and what changes you've noticed over time since your diagnosis?
Yeah, so right now, both of my legs have weakness in them. I'm unable to just apply my ankles, so I do have drop, but what I do have to wear AFO support. I use a walker to walk short distances. I do use a portable wheelchair, and then my right hand has some weakness, as well as both shoulders, and then my speech is slower, and I have to work at enunciating certain words.
So you obviously listed a lot of things there. What is your biggest challenge that you're overcoming at this point?
I think it would be the fact that you start to lose a little bit of independence as things progress. But basically I don't really feel like I have many challenges. We've worked to really eliminate the frustration of the physical changes to make it easier for me.
Okay. You told us off camera earlier that you were a great source of support for your late husband.
Yeah.
Are you willing to share a little bit about him and what it was like watching him fight a deadly disease?
Yeah, so we have leptomeningeal disease, which is a rare form of cancer, where the cancer cells get into the cerebral spinal fluid and spinal cord. So he also experienced some paralysis, but he was always so positive and selfless that was very easy to be there for him.
Oh.
We focused on keeping things fun, doing the stuff that he liked, and really just being positive.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you were a great sense of inspiration for him.
Yeah.
I understand you were born and raised in Minnesota, or am I supposed to say Minnesota? Is it soda?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, all right, I'll work on that one. But you still have family there as well. Do you have a support system here in Kansas City?
I do. So I've lived here about 8 years now. So I have quite a lot of friends, my in-laws, my mom moved here, so I do have a good system down here.
That's great. So I think we have some photos here.
Yeah.
Who are we seeing in these photos with you?
That is my brother-in-law and niece and his wife. And that's my parents, my brother, my in-laws, my brother-in-law, so my immediate family.
Okay, well, that's fantastic to have that support system around you.
Yeah.
A terminal diagnosis does not mean your life is over. You've dedicated yourself to raising money and raising awareness as you are today, and we thank you for that. But I understand you've donated samples of your voice to the University of Illinois. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I did a speech accessibility program with a team with Leeson, and I gave them samples of my voice to use to help the Apple, Google, those different programs develop an interface for people to text. Use their voice to do different commands like turn on the TV or the lights. I provided over 400 samples of my voice.
Your legacy is going to last forever. I mean, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. But you're not limited just to showing up on our show here today and helping people and helping University of Illinois, but you're involved in a lot of charity work as well. What kind of work do you do?
Yeah, so with my company I work with, we formed a committee this year, and we do a different charitable initiative each month. So we have done things for animal shelters, we wrote letters to seniors, we have done fundraisers for breast cancer research, and then for ALS Awareness Month, I did a fundraiser for Team Leeson.
That's great. Well, keep it up, Kelly. You're an inspiration. Thank you for all the people you're helping out there.
Thank you.
Dr. Jodid, what does it mean to be an ALS Association Certified Treatment Center of Excellence? That's a mouthful. What does that mean?
It is a mouthful, but that means a lot actually to the patients. It helps the patients significantly improving their quality of life and survival better than all the interventions that we have. And what it exactly means is to have a team of physicians and a big team of subspecialty providers, including a physical therapist, occupational therapist, respiratory therapist, social worker, nutritionist, speech therapist. I'm probably blocking on some, but it's a big team. And then there should be also a big involvement in research. And then that's how we get a designation like that. And it's really a big impact to patients, and it's a help for our health system too.
Yeah, multidisciplinary teams do a lot for chronic disease.
Right.
I mean, and obviously you all have done that, so that's fantastic. There are lots of ways to help people manage their ALS symptoms. Wheelchairs for movement, voice banks for speech, eventually tracheostomies for breathing, and GI tubes for nutrition. But that level of assistance gets very expensive very quickly.
That does, but you know, we do approach the patients individually based on their preferences, and most patients are very realistic on how much do they want to go with that. But we provide great help with mobility. We provide a lot of help with communication devices. Feeding tubes are definitely something that a lot of patients choose. Not a lot of patients choose to do tracheostomies. Most of the patients choose to do non-invasive ventilation.
Okay.
Some rarity happens, of course, if they have a lot of support, but the support of the multidisciplinary team that is provided, and the social work support, palliative care support that we have is really tremendous.
So we did a whole show on brain-computer interfaces. How can that help people living with ALS?
This is experimental. We are definitely, it's an area for future research, but the application is very applicable for this disease because we can insert that stent, which can be controlled externally, and then we can put it nearby the for instance, language center, or the arm movement center, or the leg movement center, and then we can control that and have language production, or arm movement, or leg movement. So for future, this is very exciting.
Yeah, that is. Dr. Stadland, what about treatments? 10 years ago, there was only one FDA-approved option. What about now?
Yeah, I mean, we currently have 3 FDA-approved treatments for ALS. 2 of them are for anyone with ALS, Riluzole and Radicava. You can think of them both as being neuroprotective. Riluzole prolongs survival a modest amount, 4 to 6 months, but it's very well tolerated. Most our patients will try this, and it may have a larger effect in an individual. Radicava is a free radical scavenger, and it was shown in sort of earlier progressive disease to slow things down by about 30%. This may be the difference between, say, still being able to raise your arm and not being able to raise your arm anymore. If we take those 2 together, we can slow the disease down and prolong survival, but just a modest amount. So there's still a lot of room for new therapies. Now, the 3rd drug, tofersen, is a true molecularly designed gene-targeted therapy, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, so maybe I'll hold off on going into it. But I do want to say one of the things we're really as a priority for our clinic is offering research. We try to offer the chance to participate in research for just about anyone in our clinic, and it ranges from studies to just understanding ALS to studies of different kinds of drugs. It might be some more rationally designed drugs to go after inflammation or protein misfolding, parts of the pathological cascade that's universally seen in other gene-targeted therapies that are being developed, and we have all of those here.
Right. So some ALS cases are hereditary. They're linked to an inherited gene, and you kind of mentioned some of that. Others are sporadic. Which is more common, and what does sporadic mean in the context of ALS?
Yeah, so the majority of patients are sporadic. Sporadic just means we don't actually have any idea what's causing it. Could be environmental, could be multiple genetic factors, but we don't know specifically what it is. That's probably around 90 to 95% of the patients we see. Around 5 to 10% have a different form, an inherited form of the disease that passes from one generation to the next. Another, say, 2 to 5% of those sporadic cases, if we test them, we'll end up finding a mutation. So it'll be a first case in them.
Okay. So there's a newer therapy, I think you started getting into it a little bit. It targets a certain gene mutation. It doesn't work in every ALS patient, but it can be prescribed to those with this gene mutation. Dr. Jada, tell me more about tofersen and the SOD1 gene, the superoxide dismutase 1 gene.
So let's talk about the gene, and I'll talk about the medication. So that gene was the first discovered gene in ALS in 1993. Some forms of that gene are very, very aggressive. So it is part of the familial ALS. The tofersen is an RNA molecule that is injected into the intrathecal space in the spinal cord, and then attaches to that abnormal gene and prevents the expression of the abnormal protein. So it is really novel way of addressing conditions with gene therapies, and it has shown that it decreased the protein level of the abnormal SOD1 level, and then it decreased NFL, which is a biomarker that we check in the ALS. Though the primary outcome of that clinical trial was not met, which is reduction in ALS-FRS. In the open label extension, there were definitely positive signals in slowing down the rate of respiratory decline and slowing down the rate of weakness as well. But definitely there is a positive impact in NFL and reduction of the SOD protein.
So yeah, to stress that, the primary endpoint of the study wasn't met, but a lot of secondary endpoints showed a lot of promise.
Right.
Okay,
That's
and
right.
that's worth explaining and going further down the path on that one.
Yeah.
There is first of its kind effort to accelerate ALS research and increase patient participation. Can you explain the Healy ALS platform trial? It sounds like a big cooperative venture.
Yeah. So really, this is a very novel methodology that was used in ALS. It was just like what was used in cancer as well. You know, it is expensive to do research studies, and if each product we do a separate research trial, it's really going to add up on burden on recruitment, burden on financial burden. The platform trial is where we have the same protocol with different agents. We have pooled controlled segment, so the patient will have higher chance of participating in getting the active medication. For instance, if we have 3 drugs and 1 control group, so each patient will have 1 in 4 chance to get the active medication. Every now and then we do replenish the control pool, but it is a very novel and a good methodology for this disease.
Yeah, definitely work. And obviously not a lot of incidence of the disease widely, so having patients is probably difficult to accrue. I understand. We're here to answer your questions. Please send them in using the info on your screen. That includes the chat on YouTube or Facebook, or emailing the Medical News Network. So let's check in with Dr. Hawkinson. So Doc Hawk, COVID, flu, and RSV rates are still fairly low, but if a parent has noticed their child coughing a bit, it may be something else. So Doc Hawk, what is going on with Mycoplasma pneumonia?
Yeah, so Mycoplasma pneumoniae is the name of the bacteria, or M. pneumoniae. It does cause pneumonia. Commonly, it can cause a disease called walking pneumonia, which I'm sure a lot of our viewers and listeners have heard about. There are episodic epidemics that do go through the country. Currently, it seems as if we are in one of those epidemics at this point in time. We know that there has been a significant uptick or increase in the number of cases, especially in the younger age groups. If you can see, Sean, on the right side of that graph there, we have those age groups. And basically, it's from under 1 year to 17 years old. You can see those top three lines have significantly increased. Those are the percentage of emergency department visits for specifically Mycoplasma pneumoniae, which is a specific bacteria, can cause upper respiratory infection, but also lower respiratory infection, mostly in the sense of walking pneumonia, as I talked about. So basically, all of our emergency department providers are aware of this, all of our pediatricians and all of our other physicians. Also, Kansas Department of Health and Environment did send out a health alert about this as well. So basically what we want our doctors to be on the lookout for is infections, particularly respiratory infections, that may not get better with typical first-line antibiotics. You may have to adjust the antibiotics to treat empirically for this disease. Now, there are diagnostics available, such as nucleic acid or PCR tests. Most likely, a lot of clinics or urgent care facilities may not have those. So, but we just want our providers to be aware of that, because it can cause, like I said, pneumonia, so significant cough, fever, malaise, which is just feeling bad, and can last for several weeks. So it's just important to understand that there are other diseases going on. And again, this is a bacteria as opposed to those other microorganisms you mentioned, which are all viruses as well. So,
all right, thanks.
Yeah.
We're still keeping an eye on H5N1 or bird flu. No cases of human-to-human spread at this point, but there are now 44 confirmed human cases in the United States. And now bird flu has been detected in a pig in Oregon. And that's important because pigs can actually be mixing vessels.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we have seen kind of an explosion of human cases of H5N1. But again, just as you said, we haven't really seen any human-to-human spread. Really, all of those cases have been in either dairy farm workers or poultry workers. But there was that patient who was in Missouri who didn't have any obvious exposure. But for the most part, we've seen significant increase in human cases. Again, not a lot of human-to-human exposure. We know this virus, this influenza virus, can infect other mammals, including pigs. And now it has recently been found in a pig. And just as you mentioned, it is vitally important because pigs can also be infected by other influenza viruses. And when that happens, just as you said, they can become a mixing vessel. So those viruses can infect the same cell. And when that happens, they can exchange genetic information. That is a large concern because we will be monitoring and we will be concerned about, now, is that virus, is this H5N1 virus now changed enough with this recombination of all the genetic material from other viruses to more easily infect humans, thereby leading to easier human-to-human spread as well. So it is vitally important we do have those surveillance mechanisms out there and that science to keep monitoring so that we can keep a handle on this H5N1 situation, which we know has affected so many dairy farms and poultry farms in America. And again, keep our livestock safe, but also, of course, keep us safe and the workers as well.
I also just read this morning there's another person in Colorado ate a quarter pounder and may have been infected again. I read that this morning. So we'll have to come back to that at some point.
Yeah.
Talk about E. coli.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Alexis Del Cid is watching for questions from our community. Alexis, over to you.
Good morning. We have a question for Kelly, and this is from Jeremy Yenser. Jeremy writes, I imagine ALS makes it very hard to sleep. Is that true? And if so, is there anything to ease some of the pain and discomfort?
Well, luckily for me, I don't really have any pain or discomfort, so I have noticed that I am very hot at night now. I used to not really be like that, so trying to stay cool, find a comfortable position to sleep in is very helpful to me.
Interesting that you get really hot now.
Oh yeah, it's like hot flashes in the middle of the night, very like randomly, not all the time, but.
Oh, interesting. Stu wants to know, Kelly, if you have any future plans to have assistance devices like a voice bank or a brain computer interface planned?
Yeah, so I did voice bank already, and that's one of the first things I did after my diagnosis. And I do have a Tony Dynavox, which is a communication device.
Okay. Doctors, is that typical that you'll recommend patients do a voice bank?
Yeah. So this is part of the multidisciplinary team. We early on, the speech therapist will give them instructions on how to do voice banking, and then when the time is ready, we will provide the communication device, which could be either you type and it generates voice with the patient's voice, or could be gaze assisted, because if they have hand weakness, they can type with their eyes.
Amy has a question for the doctors. Amy wants to know if you can put into context just how big of a deal the Ice Bucket Challenge was for raising money and attention on research.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think ALS is one of these diseases that if you've had someone in your family who's had it, you know, everyone's very aware of it, but it's still a rare disease. So the Ice Bucket Challenge, when it occurred, really took it from, you know, being in the minds of people who were associated it to being in the general public's mind. And it really brought a lot of attention and money to the field. And that money has gone a long way now to supporting research into new drugs, but also into helping support our clinics as we build those multidisciplinary teams to help treat our patients.
Marie wants to know if there are other conditions that are often mistaken for ALS. Do people sometimes get misdiagnosed with ALS?
It is very rare, especially for the classic ALS, where there are a mix of upper motor neuron signs and lower motor neuron signs. Now, it becomes slightly more prevalent in the pure upper motor neuron predominant motor neuron disease, or pure lower motor neuron predominant lower motor neuron disease. But in general, it is very rare, less than 5 to 2%.
Denise has a question, and I believe this is our final question that we have coming in. Denise wants to know, is there a genetic test that could determine if you might be at a higher risk to develop ALS?
So, as we earlier mentioned, 90% of ALS is sporadic, which we don't have a specific gene associated with it or another cause that we can identify. 10% has some genetic variation. We do, as a standard of care, get genetic panels because of, as we know, there is one medication that is approved for one gene form, which is the SOD1. So we have to do the genetic testing. But really, there's no way to predict, because 90% is not having a gene mutation.
Right. Thank you. Well, this has been a great discussion. Really appreciate everybody's time, and Kelly for joining us. But we want to get some final thoughts from everyone. Dr. Jodit?
I think there is a lot of optimism in the field. There are a lot of new trials and new ways to address this disease. We have multidisciplinary clinics that provides a tremendous amount of help to patients to improve their quality of life and increase survival. And there is more awareness with the disease. So I think the final thoughts, I know it is a deadly disease, but there is a lot of optimism and science there to advance the cause.
Right. Dr. Stadler?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate that. I think it's really been a time of hope now. We're getting more rationally designed therapies. I think some of the genetic forms of the disease are giving us windows into the pathological pathways that they may then help more people. And then the tools are really getting there to do a type of research we've never been able to do, to pool data from thousands of patients and really try to understand some of the environmental or other risk factors that may be playing into ALS, so we can try to maybe mitigate those.
Kelly, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really glad I can provide the patient perspective, and if you are going to move it, stay optimistic.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, and thanks for joining us today. My final thoughts are, we talked about Lou Gehrig's disease, a Hall of Fame baseball player. There was recently a Pro Football Hall of Famer on the Chicago Super Bowl Shuffle team. His nickname was Mongo. Just got in the Hall of Fame, and he was able to see that before he passed on. Those types of things, and then the big splashes, no pun intended, like the Ice Bucket Challenge, give a little bit of notoriety to this and get it to the forefront. But it's really important that we support the research. We're making progress, and there is hope. And I think Kelly is living proof of that. So thank you to everyone who's watching and listening. Faith, hope, and science.
A lesson in trusting your instincts. Ann Brewer was told she needed a heart transplant. A second opinion revealed the fix was far less extreme. I'm Alexis Del Cid on the next All Things Heart, her 50 years long fight to a healthy heart.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and open mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now everywhere podcasts are available.